Welcome to another virtual author chat at the Poison Pen Bookstore. I'm John Charles, and today the Poison Pen is honored to have with us not just one, but two incredibly talented authors, Vanessa Kelly and Dianne Freeman. Vanessa is here talking about her upcoming book, Murder in Highbury, which will soon be available in bookstores like the Poison Pen and libraries near you. Dianne is the author of a wonderfully entertaining series about the Countess of Harley, and her latest book is The Art Lover's Guide to Paris and Murder. Now I'd like to welcome Vanessa and Dianne.
Thank you.
Thank
Very
you.
happy to be here.
Thank you both. My first question before we kind of get into Vanessa's new book is for both of you. And as a reader, I'm fascinated by authors because they don't kind of come from nowhere. They have a past. So what can you tell us about Dianne and Vanessa before you became published authors? And we'll start with you, Vanessa.
Well, I spent a number of years in academia, actually. I did my master's at Rutgers University, and then the way I ended up in Canada from New Jersey is I was in the PhD program at the University of Toronto in English literature, 18th and 19th century female authors, and thought that would be where I was going to spend my life. But I ended up transitioning into research, and I ended up working for a trade union actually in Canada, doing a lot of research for various components of the union. So I was always writing, I was always researching, I was always writing, but it was nonfiction writing. And I reached a certain point in my career as I started to move toward an early retirement that I thought, I have to do something with my life. And I always loved historical romance. I loved the Regency. I've been reading it since I was a kid. And I thought, you know what, I kind of hooked up with some people in a local writing group, and I thought, let's just give it a try. So that's how I started.
What about you, Dianne?
Well, if you take out academia and put in business, we would almost have the same story. I've always been writing, but I went to school for a business degree and I did accounting for 30 years. And during that time, just to kind of be creative, I did a lot of writing and I would just like write myself a story and then put it aside. That'd be the end of it. Whenever I couldn't find something that I wanted to read, I would write it. And so just again, yeah, as I reached kind of that point where I was thinking about retirement, my husband had retired, I was still working. So just what will I do with myself? And I thought, well, I've always loved history and I've always loved writing. So let me try writing something
Mm-hmm.
for others to read and see how that works out. And it worked out pretty good.
Before we kind of launch into Dianne's questions, what can you tell us about the upcoming book, Murder in Highbury, Vanessa?
So the really short précis is Jane Austen's Emma Solves Murders. So that's the nutshell. But of course, it's a little more involved in that. So the story begins about 9 months after her marriage to Mr. Knightley, to her George. And Emma is very happily married and living in domestic bliss at Hartfield. George has, of course, moved to Hartfield because Mr. Woodhouse cannot be disturbed from his patterns. He couldn't tolerate Emma moving to Donwell Abbey. So they've compromised and they've worked out a very lovely life together. And Emma is still very much Queen Bee of Highbury, which is going to come in well when she begins solving murders. So Emma is still Emma. She's a more mature Emma. Of course, she's learned something from her various trials and tribulations in Austen's book. So she has matured. And so one day, the opening chapter, so I'm not giving anything away. There are no spoilers here. She and Harriet, her best friend, or one of her best friends, Harriet Martin, the former Harriet Smith, bring flowers to the church on the Saturday to decorate the altar, which is something they do every week. And they come into the church and they encounter the murdered body of Mrs. Elton lying on the church steps, the altar steps. So that is the precipitating event of the book, and that launches Emma into her quest to find not only the murder, but justice for people who end up being unfairly accused by the rather inept constable and coroner, the local lawmen. And so things almost immediately start going awry in the book. The wrong people start being accused with very little evidence, close friends of the family. And so Emma is compelled to set the course of justice on the right path and also protect Highbury. Because the thing about Emma is that Highbury is her everything, it's her entire world. So something like this is not going to happen without Emma being involved and Emma making sure it's going to be set right.
That's great. Dianne, I know you have some questions for Vanessa.
I do. I just when I first read this, I thought, wow, Emma Woodhouse or Emma Knightley as an investigator. Why didn't I think of that? Out of all of Jane Austen's characters, I really feel like she's the one that kind of plays into that.
Yeah.
How did you come up with the idea of using Emma?
Okay, so full disclosure here, I didn't.
Oh,
So it was my editor. And I had kind of reached the point with my historical romance where I needed to do something different. And I said, I got to do something different, John. I can't keep doing the same. Not that I didn't love it, but I have to do something different. And he just threw out, he said, what about writing a historical mystery series based on Emma? And the lights just went off. It was like fireworks off in my head.
mhm.
And you're absolutely right, Dianne. I'm actually astonished that no one has ever written a historical mystery series with Emma. I mean, there have been a number of Austen-based, actually quite a lot, Austen-based books. But Emma is, I agree with you. I think she's the best. She's the one who most fits the profile of amateur sleuth because she's immensely curious, as we know, and she's very curious about human relationships. Again, she has this sense of she's very proprietorial toward Highbury, so she would be invested in protecting it. But she's curious, she's creative, she's smart, she's imaginative, which allows her to make leaps when other people don't. And sometimes that imagination gets her into a little trouble. She can be a little impulsive, as we know, right? But the neat thing is, I think, and this is all in the book, which in Jane Austen's Emma, which is so great. George is a magistrate. I mean, she's married to the magistrate. How much better could it get for her, right?
Yeah, she's got an in.
So she's got an in, and she's also got somebody to check her. He's really the only person who can check her. So when her imagination does run away from her, or she does start to push the envelope a little bit, and not endanger herself. A lot of times he's fearful, George is fearful she's going to endanger herself, but she does have that check. She has that sounding board. She has that in, but she's creative. She's curious. She's smart. She's clever, and she's at the top of the social heap. So what could be better, right? So I agree with you.
The top of the social heap is part of what makes it work. People will talk to her. They have respect for her. And yeah, she's a bold character, but without being reckless. So George doesn't have to worry about her too much. I think she's kind of perfect.
Yeah. Yeah, I felt that way too. I mean, the other thing is Emma was not only my favorite Austen book. It's my favorite book. It's my favorite book, just about. Maybe Lord of the Rings sometimes, depending on my mood, the Lord of the Rings. But Emma's my favorite book. So that was one of the reasons the fireworks went off in my head. It was like, oh my God, I feel like my entire writing career has been leading up to this. And the other thing is, which also works for me, is that she's a hilarious person. I mean, she's a hilarious character, not always intentionally, but she is a very funny person, which is what I realized. Of course, the first thing I did was go back and reread the book when my editor floated it. I tore the book apart, and I thought I'd forgotten how incredibly funny the book was.
Mhm.
So it just really lent itself to the whole project, I think, from the beginning. I was just thrilled to do it.
Did John know, as a disclosure, um, we have the same editor. So I'm curious, did John know that Emma was your favorite book?
He didn't. I think he just thought because I'd kind of come to the end of the road, or felt like I'd come to the end of the road on the historical romance, and because I worked in the Regency period. And I guess he must have thought my voice fit it. We just kind of had a little chat back and forth, and it was like, yeah, let's do this.
Mhm.
And it worked. I drew up a proposal, and he loved the proposal, and it was, away from there. It was great.
Speaking of the Regency period, that was kind of before policing as we know it
Hmm.
really was in effect. How did you research that? How do you know how it works? Okay, George is a
Hmm.
magistrate, but what other type of law enforcement was there? And what did you find out about that? How did you make that
Right.
work?
Yeah, that was in terms of the research component of the book, the biggest part. That was the
Mhm.
biggest element. And it's the reality is the Regency policing, as you suggest, in the Regency era, it's a dog's breakfast. I mean, it's just all over the place. The Metropolitan Police hasn't been created yet. um, Scotland Yard doesn't exist. If you're in
Mhm.
London, there are the Bow Street Runners. There are a few more structures that are established in London or in a big city, but out in the country, um,
Yeah.
it's just there are variety. If there's even anything more than a parish beadle in a small village, you're kind of lucky. So what I had, fortunately, I'm a member of the Regency Fiction Writers Group, which
Okay.
is an excellent group that has many, many talented people in it, names you would both recognize. And again, serendipitously, just as I was starting on this book, Louisa Cornell, who is a wonderful writer and historian and researcher, was teaching a course on, well, she called it Regency CSI, which was really
Okay.
fun. So it was like, okay, sign me up. And that provided me with a good foundation for then doing more research on my own. But the great thing about law enforcement for writers' purposes in the Regency era is that it is so loosey goosey. It's kind of chaotic, and it differs from one village and one town and one county to the next. There are certain conventions, of course, that are established. You have to have a coroner, um, but sometimes the coroner takes the lead, sometimes the magistrate takes the lead, sometimes the local constable takes the lead. And what was really great for the purposes of the book, sometimes they all get into competition with each other. Like everybody was wanting to protect their own turf back then. So that was a really fun element of the book to work with.
Mhm.
But it also lends itself to having an amateur investigator. And in fact, during the Regency period, depending on how remote, if the crime took place in a remote part of the country where there wasn't a coroner who is always called to come in to investigate if it's the potential for murder, it could take the coroner days to get there because there weren't that many coroners in
Yeah.
England. So that means, locals or a local magistrate or somebody could do investigating on their own. So the chaotic nature of policing in the Regency era actually lends itself, I think, um, for the purposes of amateur sleuthing, because you can
Mhm.
you can kind of get away with a lot that you wouldn't necessarily be able to get away with in a later era.
The amateur.
Right.
Yeah.
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 It's one of the things that surprised me, even into my era, 1890s into 1900. It may still be true today. I don't know. But the coroner doesn't have to have any sort of medical background,
Right. Right.
which I always just assumed a coroner was
Right.
a doctor, you know.
No.
That was true in the US too, but that
Yeah.
really surprised me.
Yeah, I was surprised by that too, and for the purposes of my book, for my series, I made the coroner a doctor, because if there was a doctor in the village, he could be appointed as the coroner. And but you're right, a lot of times what had to happen is the coroner had to get a doctor to come in and do, well, they didn't really do autopsies, but to do an investigation and a study of the body and crime scene and that type of thing. And I thought, oh, that's just adding one layer too many. So I'm going to make the coroner the doctor.
Yeah.
And that was kind of fun too, because as every Janeite knows, Mr. Woodhouse is devoted to his Mr. Perry, the apothecary.
Yeah.
And so I was able to have my coroner and Mr. Perry also kind of in comical conflict. So that was just another way to bring in Emma's world, the world of Austen's Emma, into my world too. So it was fun.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's very chaotic. The the whole scene of policing at that time.
Yeah, they were just kind of creating the structure.
Whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. But as far as the characters, you really do bring Jane Austen's characters to life. They are really true to who I saw them as. And Mr. Woodhouse in particular, I just thought was adorable in this. Well, not adorable, sweet. Was just such a nice old man.
He is.
And Miss Bates. So did you just kind of get a feel for who they were and then brought that forward and then created, backgrounds as you needed them to? How did you manage that?
Well,
and did you worry about doing that?
Oh yeah. I mean, I don't think any writer who's kind of intruding on that sort of hallowed ground can't feel a certain degree of trepidation, and I did. So the first thing but other people have gone, other people had trod that ground before, so I thought, why not? And there have been so many movies and TV series adaptations as well. But yes, I was nervous about that. So the first thing I did really was I spent about a month just with the book, reading it, rereading it, pulling it apart, and just trying to absorb it kind of into my bones, into my writing bones as much as I could. And, I was reading a Jane Austen biography, trying to get into her world as well. And surprisingly, what was really helpful was watching the various adaptations, the movies and the TV adaptations, because you can't really, for a modern audience, you can't really take Austen level, that elevated, incredible prose, but you can't take Austen level prose and translate it, I think, into a contemporary a historical mystery for a modern reader. I mean, first of all, I don't think anybody can duplicate her writing, but also if you were to pull apart certain scenes, like one scene in particular that is one of my favorite scenes in the book. I don't know if you remember when they have the picnic at Donwell Abbey, when they all go to pick strawberries.
Yeah.
And Mrs. Elton wants to ride a donkey. She makes Mr. Elton take her on a donkey, and it's a very hot day. And so Austen, basically, it's almost a page long. It's almost a page long of kind of a stream of consciousness of Mrs. Elton that shows how excited she is at the beginning and how much she hates everything at the end. And it's this just brilliant prose, but it's basically one long sentence in a way, a stream of consciousness sentence. Well, you can't, I couldn't duplicate anything like that, right? So the movies, and in particular, the movie with Gwyneth Paltrow, the original Emma, which I know a lot of people don't like that. I love it. I always love it. Yeah, I think a lot of people diss it, and I don't understand it because I think it captures the world really beautifully, kind of the sweetness and the coziness of it too, which is the other thing I wanted to capture, right? And Gwyneth Paltrow was the same age as Emma when she made She was only 21 when she made that. So to me, I thought she was perfect.
Yeah.
And that, because I'm a visual person too, that helped me cement the characters. I know I'm kind of taking the long-winded approach way around to this, to answering this, but that really helped cement the characters in my mind, and hearing them speak rather than trying to imitate Austen's prose. Hearing them speak, I think, helped me. The dialogue from those movies and series kind of helped me tune my ear to what might work.
Yeah.
So it kind of went from book to reading about Austen and her life, and to the various movies and series, and then in from there. So I kind of just immersed myself in every aspect as much as I could before I started writing.
That makes sense. I don't know. There's like very little research,
Mm-hmm.
original research that you could have done unless you got Jane Austen's notes as she was writing the book. But yeah, that's the
Of
best way to.
which there are none,
I
apparently.
didn't think so.
There's like, I was just reading that the other day, because her family, first of all, she didn't save copies of her various drafts. There was basically just the final draft is all that was ever left. And then, of course, her family, various members of her family, burned most of her letters.
Yeah.
Sadly. So yeah, I basically just had the books, biographies, and then modern adaptations. So
And I think she was saying she was going to create a heroine that no one but she
but
would
she
like.
would like,
Isn't that how she said it with
yes,
regard to? And I
yeah.
really like Emma.
I think a lot. Yeah, she's a little hard on Emma in that respect. I mean, maybe
Yeah.
she was comparing her to Elizabeth Bennet in Pride and Prejudice, but I love Emma. I think Emma is, well, Catherine in Northanger Abbey is probably the funniest heroine, although often
Yeah.
unintentionally. But Emma is very funny. And yeah, she's very human. I mean, she makes mistakes, and she has,
She
yeah,
takes
she's got,
care of her
she
father. She's a
does.
very, I thought,
She's
very
a kind,
kind person.
she is a kind person. I mean, she can, she's a bit of a snob to start out. That's what I think, that's the character flaw that she really had to come to grips with, was her snobbiness. But, she learns that, and she learns that through the course of the novel. So that's why also it made my job easier, because she is a more mature character.
Yeah.
I didn't have to grapple quite as much with that level of immaturity. I mean, I think Emma is, to a certain extent, a coming of age story, right? She's learning to mature and become a woman. And so Austen made it easy for me. She did all the hard work.
Yeah, Emma just grew up. Speaking of
Yeah.
her age, just before this, I didn't have your book handy, and I just drew a blank at Knightley's first name, which is George, of all
George.
things.
You're George. That's right. How could you forget?
I just did. And so I just Googled it. Did you know he was at the story? He was either 37 or 38.
Yeah.
So he's
Yeah.
17 years older
Yeah.
than her, which was kind of normal in the
Yeah.
Regency era. And I don't know, because literally I just found this out. So I'm kind of thinking, I don't think you dwell on the age difference or
No.
bring it to the attention.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah, it does. I think it does kind of creep some people out. I mean, there are sections in the book in Emma where he talks about, well, he has a conversation with Mrs. Weston about what he feels are this inappropriate relationship she has with Harriet, because Harriet comes from a different background, and
Another class.
right, in another class, and he thinks Emma's just going to control her, and etc. And he says something to the effect that I held her in my arms when she was a baby, and he's watched her grow up, and he's basically been her mentor. So that does make people, I think, uncomfortable sometimes. Some people have, I see it in Jane Austen groups, people register discomfort with that. So yeah, I don't lean into that. And if you look again at the TV series or the movies, they don't make too much of a fuss over that either.
No. You certainly don't visually see that big age difference.
Yeah.
And it was normal back then. So you have to remember too that you're reading historical fiction,
Right, right.
and that's part of it.
Yeah.
Okay, I wanted to ask you, with regards to your victim, which you've already outed who it is, why did you choose Mrs. Elton?
You know, I gotta confess, I kind of don't even remember why I chose her. I just think I thought it would be funny. I mean, it's murder is never funny,
Hmm.
but she just seemed, if there was a person in Highbury you would want to murder, it would be Mrs. Elton. So, which of course was useful because there are then so many potential suspects.
Right.
So I think, at the end of chapter one, Harriet says, "Oh, Mrs. Knightley, who would wish to murder her?" And Emma says, "Well, kind of who wouldn't, but who would actually do it?"
Mhm.
So I think that just popped immediately that she would be the victim and that she would make a good victim for
Yeah.
a lot of reasons. Structurally, just making my job easier for me too.
A wide array of suspects.
Yes.
Yes. Okay, you are even in your romance, you go to the Regency era. Isn't that
Mhm.
correct? Okay.
Yes, yes,
What
yes.
draws you to that era? What does that part of
Yeah,
history mean to you?
yeah. It's interesting. I grew up in Haddonfield, New Jersey. I don't know if you've ever been to that part of South Jersey, but Haddonfield is actually, I believe, it's a very historic town. It's a town from the colonial era. I think it was founded in the 1600s. It was the second Quaker town to be founded in America. So it's got a lot of history, and many of the original houses from the colonial era are still there. And there's a little museum, and the main street through town is called King's Highway because the King's troops actually marched up it during the Civil War. So I grew up surrounded by history. It was really focus in our schools, our local history, as well as American history in general. Now, the interesting thing was when I was growing up, the English were always the bad guys, because America, the
Yes. Yeah.
colonialists, England was the bad guy. When I was, I think about 12 or 13, my older sister had an English pen pal, and her English pen pal sent her Georgette Hare books. And I
Oh,
still remember the first one I read, which was Regency Buck, which is not even her best book, Hare's best book, but it was the first one I read. And that it was like, it got its hook in me, and that was it. From then on, I wanted to read everything set in the Regency era, which of course, by the time I was in high school, I was reading Austen at that point. So there's just something about, I mean, I had this natural predilection for history, I think, just growing up in a town surrounded by it. And, but I think that early exposure to Georgette Hare and this world that was so completely different from anything I'd ever read about or come across. The whole the ton and this kind of glittering society of the Regency era juxtaposed with this really gritty other side of life, right?
mhm,
So
yeah.
I just think that early exposure, maybe if I'd been exposed to somebody else, another writer, but I think that early exposure to Hare, who also is just such a fantastic writer and
Yeah.
wrote such wonderful stories. And
Mhm.
I think even then I thought, gosh, I wish I could write a story like that.
I think it's
Yeah.
interesting you bring her up because she also wrote mysteries.
She did. And I
Yeah.
love her mysteries too.
Mhm.
So it was, and even many of her Georgian and Regency romances have little mysteries in
Yes.
them too, right?
Mhm. Yeah, I
Yeah,
think they do. I've
yeah.
only read one of her mysteries, and
They're,
because I actually didn't know until recently that she
yeah,
wrote mysteries as well.
yeah,
And
yeah.
yeah, it was really interesting.
They're fun. They're very much, I think, wouldn't you say, John, they're in the
They're
cozy
definitely,
world?
yeah, they're almost like Agatha Christie in a sense.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah.
She's not quite as clever with her
no,
twists and things, but she
no,
definitely has the setting and the kind of the
yeah,
characterization down.
yeah,
Yeah, they're really, I mean, I enjoy them.
I do too. Yeah, they're a lot of fun.
But yeah, that's interesting. And Regency is always, obviously, the name Regency comes from England, but it always seems like the rest of the world existed at that time too. But
Mhm.
there's nobody else, there's no American historical novels that seem to take place from in the 1810s,
Yeah.
it's or
Well,
Canadian.
yeah. Oh, well, there was, it's kind of a funny story with John. At one point, I sent him a summary for one of my novels that the hero was going to come from Canada, and he kind of had a little panic attack because he said, "You're not setting this in Canada, are you?" And it's like, "No, no, don't worry, it's fine. It's still." And that was when I was doing my Clan Kendrick, so it was still in
Mm,
Scotland. But I think looking back on when I was reading more American authors, American romance authors, particularly you had westerns. I mean, that was the big era. I
true,
think
true.
was
Yeah, I forgot about
the
that.
Western era, and there were some set during the colonial era, I think, but
Hmm.
no, the Regency America just didn't seem to be. I don't know, maybe because of the War of 1812, it was a difficult period to navigate for a lot of reasons.
Could
Could
be.
also be that we really didn't have a class system per se, like the
Right,
English did. So, I
right,
Yeah,
mean, people are so
right,
thrilled, like Bridgerton, they want to
right.
then watch the upper crust, not
Yes,
the
that's
maids
very
and the
true.
butlers.
Yeah.
yeah,
And
that's
that's
true.
probably why the Gilded Era is so popular
Yeah.
these days too,
Mhm.
right? The
Mhm.
Gilded Age, which is so great. So
Yeah,
I think, yeah,
we just created our own class system.
yeah, we did. Yeah, it's a
All
little more
right, yeah,
subtle, but it's there.
yeah, yeah. And speaking of locations, it's been a while since I've read Emma,
Mhm.
but I don't recall it being so clearly laid out, the town of Highbury, as you have it.
Mhm.
Is that all in the book, or did you kind of develop some of Highbury on your own?
Well, I did develop some of it on my own, but the wonderful thing about writing an Austen adjacent series is the fact that there's so much tremendous scholarship out there. And I just started Googling what did Highbury look like or maps of Highbury. And of course, the Jane Austen Society of North America, which is a wonderful organization that has many brilliant scholars as members. This map of Highbury just popped up that was put together by an Austen scholar who kind of, I guess, teased things out of the book, which I would not have gotten. I mean, I'm so
Yeah,
lucky at the
I
depth
didn't.
of material. And so I was able to kind of use that I did use that as a template, but I also I had to work out, like, you can kind of tell when you read Emma how far it takes. Like, how far does it take to walk from Hartfield to Miss Bates's apartments? Well, not very long. So you guesstimate maybe 10 minutes, right? So I think a lot of it I tried to figure out by how long it would take to get from one place to the next. Thankfully, though, as I said, there were maps, and nobody's really sure, right?
Yeah,
But there were scholars who made educated guesses and put these basic maps together, which were really helpful for me.
that's amazing.
Yeah.
Did you find working with a fictitious place easier, harder, just different than working with the real place? Like I could go to Google Maps and say, ask, how far is it to walk from this street to that street and how
Hmm.
long would it take me? And I just have it.
Yeah, it is problematic, and it can be problematic. Like I would write a scene where the characters were walking somewhere, and the scene would be going on and on and on, and I'd have to catch myself and say, okay, they would be like a mile past Highbury at this point. This is a little village, and
Yeah.
so but again, there is a fair amount of research. People have done a fair amount of research on where Highbury would likely be. It was in Surrey, we know that, of course. It's 16 miles from London because that's when Frank Churchill goes to London to get his haircut, much to
Oh,
Mr. Knightley's contempt. I think he mentions that it's 16 miles to London. And so he rides back and forth to get his haircut. So scholars have speculated that there are a number of villages in the towns in the area that stand in for Highbury.
mhm.
And then there's Box Hill, where there's the famous Box Hill episode from the book. And you can kind of tell you could tell how far away that was. But yeah, it's tricky. This as a writer too, that you have to keep track of what you're writing, in
Mhm.
terms of
Oh,
where
yeah.
things are and who's doing what and who lives where. And I always put together an extensive Bible because I never remember anything. I just have a terrible memory. So I
Mhm.
have to have a Bible of everything because I'll write a scene, and I'm revising the second book now, Murder at Donwell Abbey, and I'll write a scene, and then I go back to revise, and I thought, I wrote almost that same discussion 3 chapters ago, and I have
Yeah.
no memory of doing that.
Mhm.
So,
Yes, I will.
yeah.
I do the same thing.
Yeah.
When I go to read that draft, it's like, didn't I just have this scene? Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
But I don't keep an extensive file. You're better. I
Oh
should,
my
but I
gosh.
don't. Yeah, so I'm
I'm
waiting for duplicates to happen.
yeah. I'm kind of well, thank God for copy editors and editors.
Mhm.
But I'm pretty much a mad plotter. I spend a lot of time doing research and plotting before I start writing. I think primarily to keep my anxiety level under control, right?
Mhm.
I can't just fly off into the mist, which I wish I could. So maybe that has to do with my days as a researcher.
Maybe. I do with regard to copy editors. I was working on book 2 and I got the copy edits from book 1. And towards the end, at one point, Rose is gifted a kitten.
Mm.
And at the end of the book, the copy editor said, "What happened to the kitten?" It's like you never mention it again. And I'm in book 2 going, whoa, I forgot there should be a kitten in here.
Yeah,
So it's just so easy to
it
lose
is. It
track of
is
some of
easy. And
these. But
somebody will catch you out. There's always somebody to
yeah,
catch you
you
out.
hope it's your copy editor, but that's not
Yes.
always the case. Yeah,
Yes. Yeah.
it is funny. Well, what do you have Emma doing next?
So yes, the next book is Murder at Donwell Abbey, because one of the things I want to do with the series is use these well-loved and well-known locations
Mhm.
as settings for the murder, and for the mystery. And I'm even thinking at some point, of course, with editorial approval, of perhaps bringing in characters from other Austen novels. If it would work, we'll see,
Oh,
but other settings and characters from other novels. But this one also takes place in Highbury, exclusively in Highbury, at Donwell Abbey.
okay, now refresh
So
me. Donwell Abbey is
that
George's
is
home.
George's home. That is George's family's ancestral estate, which is only about a mile from Highbury. He walks back and forth.
Yeah.
He goes to work there during the day, and he walks back for dinner in the evening with them and the family. So, but if you recall from the first book, Murder in Highbury, there is a scene where Mrs. Elton's funeral reception is held at Donwell Abbey
Oh, yeah,
because
yeah.
it's much bigger, right? So there's an event. Book 2 starts with an event at Donwell Abbey where the murder occurs, and so that's moving the scene right into the middle of George's world,
Yeah.
and it's tricky because as the magistrate, a murder has taken place now in his house. So that kind of is going to hamstring him a bit as to what he can do. So of course it's going to be on Emma to figure things out. And the plot for Murder at Donwell Abbey is a little more expansive. I've added some elements to it. So we'll see how that works. Like I said, I'm doing a lot of revising because the first book was, because it was so much based on the novel, was easy, and the plot just seemed to come to me, and it was very focused, I think, on Highbury, and the characters, that it came really quite easily to me. But this one I'm kind of trying to expand a bit, kind of expand the world a bit, so that's a bit trickier, which is why I need to refer to my Bible and the maps rather frequently. But it's been fun. Yeah.
How are you enjoying mystery now that you
I
are
love
in
it.
this world?
Oh my gosh, I love it. I really love it. Like I said, like I mentioned to John, my books have always been kind of I've always had a mystery driving my plots, even if it's a light mystery. Some of my romances had heavier mysteries, some of them were really light, but I love it. I mean, this is going to sound funny, but I'm just so happy I can close the door on the sex scenes and not have to read them anymore, to tell you the truth. So, because that was the sex scenes in my romances were always the bane of my existence.
Oh gosh.
So but I just love it. I love the community. I love the mystery community. I think it's a great community. The romance community was great too, but it's wonderful being in this different world with a different focus. And I mean, for me as a writer, I feel like it's really revitalized me and given me new energy, and I'm just thrilled about it. And it's a very welcoming community too, with people. You've been very welcoming, and there are just so many people who've just been great. I'm really enjoying it and really thankful for the opportunity.
Yeah, well, I'm really glad I landed in mystery. Just for that, it's a wonderful place to be.
Yeah, it is.
It's a wonderful debut, Vanessa, as a mystery novel.
Thank you.
But I mean, you're so good at historical details about the Regency period. But what kind of surprised me, delighted me, I guess, as a reader, was I got these little flashes of Agatha Christie in the book, in the sense that Emma is kind of like Miss Marple. She's underestimated by so many people.
Yes.
And that allows her to be such an effective sleuth. And you really capture St. Mary's, your version of St. Mary's Mead in Highbury. You had written something I thought was really insightful, and I'll have to read it because I don't have that good a memory. But you said, think of a novel like Jane Austen's Emma. Gossip travels quickly in the small town of Highbury. And that's exactly what Christie was doing in her village mysteries. It's all that kind of people connecting clues and gossip, things like that.
Well, first of all, thank you so much. And again, I have to refer back to Austen. And this thought is not original to me, but one of the things I read when I was reading various scholars about Austen was that one of the things that's really neat about Emma that I think lends itself to mystery is Emma. Emma is basically a mystery. It's the mystery of Frank Churchill and Jane Fairfax. And there are clues sprinkled all the way through it. And Emma's in that book, Emma's very bad at picking up on the clues. And she learns from that experience. But you're right, it's that small town. And I grew up in a small town, as I mentioned. I grew up in a small town. So that was one of the things that really appealed to me, was kind of the small town relationships, and how, as you say, Emma is so good at kind of, well, she becomes better at parsing, that she's a better sleuth than she's a matchmaker, that's for sure. And but it's her world that she moves in, and one of the things I really liked was how the warm, wonderful world of Highbury, with the gossip, I mean, it does have the gossip and people being silly and that type of thing, and the silly Cox sisters and people being impertinent and whatever. But it's a warm, happy place. But as we know from Christy, these small villages can become, when murder descends, they can become very sinister and claustrophobic.
Mhm.
And so I just think it was a great setting, and I'm really happy to hear that element of the book resonated with you. Thank you.
Yeah, no, you did a terrific job.
Thank you.
If we can maybe switch gears a little bit, because before we run out of time, I want to ask Dianne, I heard rumors that there's something new in the works from you on the horizon, a novella.
Oh, okay, yeah, I do. I talked
I
to
mean,
my
you don't have to
editor.
say anything if it's top secret, but
No,
whatever.
no, not at all, not at all. And it's going to be an audiobook, so it should be
Oh, cool.
available. I forget what that's called. Libro. On Libro, if they want to buy it on Libro and get it to Poison Pen, it'll be out in April. It's called George and Francis Roll the Dice. And
Great title.
well, I thought it's a novella. I can finally get away from that
Mhm. Guide to.
this guide to that. So they are having a honeymoon in Deauville in France in a villa, which if you have read book 7, you know that there's a villa involved at the end of it. And Francis and George are going to check it out. And it kind of is like Guys and Dolls, but taking place 20 years earlier and with a French accent is kind of the way I look at it. So it's a fun book. I didn't feel like I had enough to make a whole book out of it. So I thought, how about a novella? Besides, I didn't have enough time to write a whole other book. So that's coming out in April. And then book 8, which will be the last one in France, will be coming out in June of next year, the end of June.
Any titles yet, or still debating that?
Yeah, that is, oh yeah, I think I told you that one. We're sticking with it. A Daughter's Guide to Mothers and Murder.
Oh, that's a great title.
Okay, well, it struck me as odd, but everybody seems to like it, so there it is.
And Vanessa, now that you're in mystery, does that mean we're gonna take a leave from historical romance for a while from you as well?
Yeah, I think so. I think that I'm fully committed to the series and going in this direction and just enjoying it. So, and I don't want to squeeze too. I want to leave room for the series to grow and not kind of pressure myself too much by putting on my historical romance writer hat. So, yeah.
What about your ultra literary ego?
Mr. Sykes.
Yes.
Yes, he's given up writing.
Good.
Diane, did you know that I used to write books with my husband?
No,
Contemporary romances as VK Sykes.
I did not know.
So yeah, while I was writing historical romances too, and thank you for remembering them because sometimes I've forgotten that we wrote them. So we self-published a number of books, contemporary romances, and also some mysteries, which he would probably get back into the mystery world. We wrote a couple of thrillers, and that was a lot of fun. He did most of the heavy lifting with that. For now, that's on hold, but we do occasionally talk about going back into that world, and maybe writing another thriller together, which would be fun. So for now, though, he's enjoying his retirement.
Ah,
I do have
yeah.
another question. You're writing in the Austen world, and there's a number of mystery writers that have made that transition.
Mhm.
Do you have any particular favorites of your own? Do you read mysteries with Austen settings?
Yes, yes. In fact, I'm looking at them as I have them all piled up on my bookshelf. I really like. I hope I'm saying her last name correctly. Carrie Debris. Is it Carrie
Mm.
Debris? She
Yeah, she
writes.
did a wonderful series.
Mr. and Mrs. Darcy.
Mhm.
Yeah, and
Oh,
so I really like that series. I have, much to my chagrin, I have not read the Jane Austen mysteries, although
Stephanie
I have,
Behrens.
yeah,
Oh,
Stephanie Behrens.
you're in for a treat. They're really good.
they're
Good.
wonderful.
Good. I have two of them on my TBR pile. So I was a little reluctant to read too many Austen oriented while I was writing because I was like, I don't want to, I don't want to. You can get influenced by other
You
writers, I
can.
think, right? So I
Mhm.
was kind of careful to not do too much of that. One of the things that I did do was I read a lot of the contemporary Austen-esque novels. Like Alexander McCall Smith did a contemporary version of Emma, which was fun.
Oh,
And um, there's another author, Pride and Prejudice and Peril, Katie, I'm trying to get her last name, Katie Oliver, which is a contemporary as well, where the heroine is an Austen scholar. So that's fun.
it's
So
amazing how many how Austen has been so adaptable
oh,
into different formats. I
it's
mean,
incredible.
even Curtis Sittenfeld did his take on or her take. I'm not sure which, but they did a take on Austen too.
Yeah,
Mhm.
I guess because, her characters are so lifelike. I mean, it's a cliche to
Yeah.
say they jump off the page, but hers do. And she writes on such universal themes of family and, maturity and,
I think that's it in particular, the themes, because it's so accessible to everyone
mhm,
wherever you are in your
mhm,
life.
mhm,
There it's so relatable.
mhm. No, it's true. When you even look at a book like Sense and Sensibility,
Mhm.
which is a tougher read. I mean, I think sometimes we forget how tough her books can be. I mean, there's real heartbreak
Yeah.
in her
Persuasion.
books.
Yeah. Mm.
And most almost nobody gets through life without having their heart broken at least
Mhm.
once. And when you see what Marianne, well, and Eleanor too, what they go
Mhm.
through. So as you say, those are universal experiences that translate still translate really well. So,
Mhm. Persuasion,
oh
second
yeah,
chances and
oh
hope,
yeah,
Yeah.
you
yeah,
know.
yeah.
Yeah. My favorite.
It's a wonderful book.
Mhm.
We're almost out of time, but before we end, can both of you tell us how readers can learn more about you and your books? Are you on social media? Vanessa?
Yes. First, there's my website, which is www.vanessakellyauthor.com. And I am on Facebook as Vanessa Kelly Author, and I'm on Instagram as Vanessa Kelly Author. And my website also has a newsletter sign up, which is actually the best way, the most consistent way to get my news. So
Mhm.
yeah, thank you.
You're welcome, Diane.
My website is www.difreeman.com. And that's probably going to be your best way because I know I'm on Facebook as Dianne Freeman author, but I don't remember who I am on Instagram. And I'm also on Threads, but your best bet is to go to my website and then you can follow me on any of those social media
Yeah.
sites. I would love for you to do that. And I also have a newsletter that comes out monthly, and you can sign up for that if you'd like to.
That's wonderful. Before we have to close, I know Murder in Highbury is coming out at the end of October. Is that correct?
October 22nd. Yes.
Okay. So, but I would encourage readers who are listening and tuning in that it's always good to pre-order because you don't have to wait until the date of publication. Go to your local bookstore. Hopefully it's the Poison Pen. We do mail orders, or whichever bookstore is near you, or your local library, and suggest that they purchase the book if they don't have it on order. All of those things help authors in advance. And it's a good way to make sure a series you love, like this new series from Dianne, continues on. I'd like
Thank
to,
you.
Absolutely.
oh, you're
Thank you
welcome.
very much.
Thank you both for writing such wonderfully entertaining
Thank
books.
you.
I'd like to thank Diane and Vanessa for joining us today and for all of you listening in to another author chat at the Poison Pen Bookstore. Thank you. We look forward to seeing you virtually next time.
Thanks so much.
Thanks so much, John.
It was
Thank
great.
you.